Welcome, welcome.
Hey, everybody.
To the We Are For Good podcast. This is such a big day for us,
Oh my
John.
gosh, this is one of our get list, folks.
We have an ungettable get list, and we have them on the podcast today all the way from the Sunshine State. Please help us welcome Thomas Matz and Kelley Sims. They're with Feeding Tampa Bay, and what they have done at Feeding Tampa Bay, not only just historically, but in the last 6 months is mind-blowing.
Game-changing.
Totally game-changing. Thomas, Kelley, welcome to the We Are For Good podcast. How are you?
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Oh, we're so delighted that you're here. I want to give everybody just a little bit of context about how this story came to us, but I have a really dear friend, Beth Silverstein, who's just a really accomplished development consultant out of Missouri, and she was telling me this story. And there were so many layers of amazingness, of creative rebelness, of innovation, and it was just all found in this one nonprofit. And so we've brought Thomas on, who is the president and CEO, been with the organization for almost 8 years, and not only is he an incredibly kind individual, we can assess that in the 5 minutes that we've known him, but he has had such crazy accomplishments since he's been there. I mean, fundraising has increased by 400% during his tenure. They've been Nonprofit of the Year twice in the last 7 years. But the most important thing to me about his incredible, long, extensive resume is that they have grown community meals from 20 million to 60 million per year and during his tenure. So Thomas, way to go, man. That is some incredible leadership. And then we've also got Kelley on the show, and Kelley is the Chief Development Officer with Feeding Tampa Bay. And she is has 30 years of experience. She is a fountain of information. She loves being a rebel, so you know she's our people. And she just has this great breadth of information and knowledge about social media, marketing, which is probably why she is so accomplished in what she does. And I just think this dynamic duo is going to bring so many tips and tools today. So first, if we can dive in, I just want to tell us a little bit about yourselves, where you grew up, where you went to college. We like to give everybody a chance to shout out to their alma mater. Thomas, we'll start with you.
So my alma mater is the mighty University of North Florida, the Ospreys.
Woo-woo.
Right? School no one knows, but I matriculated from.
I do know what an
I was a
Osprey
kid that
is.
grew up in the Northeast, so my sensibilities and thought processes were largely influenced by being close to New York City for many years. I lived there, and
I think I hear the accent.
I spent half of my life below the Mason-Dixon line. I know we don't refer to that anymore, so half of my life has been spent in the South. Half of my life has been spent in the for-profit community, my work life. The other half has been spent in the nonprofit community, and so I've had the opportunity to really do both and engage in both areas.
That's awesome.
Awesome. And what about you, Kelley?
Yes, so I grew up in Southern California, living out my rebel life in any way that I could during that time. Traveled across country to South Carolina to attend a small private Baptist university where I met my husband, and we, sight unseen, married and came to Tampa in 1983, have been there since that time, 3 kids born and raised here, and have had such a interesting career and even personal life watching this city and community grow in supporting others, and my work beginning in marketing and kind of moving my way or backing into fundraising has been an interesting journey, as I think Tampa has grown, at the same time. So it's been a great time to watch.
I love it. Would you give us both some context of Feeding Tampa Bay? I mean, we've heard about it, what's happened through COVID, but what was kind of the state of things before COVID? I know we're going to dive into what happened in the last few months, but what's the history of the organization?
Yeah, I would say so. Feeding Tampa Bay was born out of the original food banks that started for probably a longer podcast, I'd share the story of food banking. But the gentleman that started food banks spent the rest of his career helping other cities set up food banks. And we were one of the ones that was established in the early 80s when food banking as a concept was really introduced across the United States as a way of really connecting the gap between many of our citizens, neighbors, friends who didn't have the food resources they needed, and of course, the food that was excess in the system. So we've been here for a long time. I think we just passed, Kelley, I think it was maybe 2 months ago, we passed our 500th millionth meal delivered. I don't know if I got my THs right in there, but 500 million meals out to the community in our history, right? We're proud of that because those are meals and moments where we stepped into the lives of someone who needed us to be there with them and for them. And so there's a lot of kids who have gone through school or seniors who have made their way through difficult circumstances because our organization stepped in and said, let us make sure you eat today. As our mission has evolved over time, I would say that we have one primary objective, which is a hunger-free Tampa Bay. We believe that's possible. We know that's possible.
Love it.
And we really want two outcomes from that because these are, this is what you want to have happen, right? The outputs are the meals, but the outcomes are the things we're interested in. The first one is health. Food is really prescriptive of health. When we think about providing a meal, we're providing a healthcare solution to a person who would otherwise not have that opportunity. And then secondarily, we want capability. We also have a variety of programs deployed that enable folks in our community to reestablish their ability to take care of themselves and look to live the life that they want to live. And so we work and think about those different types of outcomes in equal measure. I'd finish by saying we're the largest food relief provider in a 10-county area. So much like many food banks across the United States, right there in Oklahoma, there is a really large food bank that covers most of the state of Oklahoma. So we cover a 10-county area over here in West Central Florida. And every day we look after, pre-COVID, we looked after about 625,000 folks who are food insecure in the area that we're responsible for. And as said, we deploy resources to make sure that families and individuals are able to, we try and keep folks from falling through a net that none of us want to see people fall through.
That's it. I mean, you live in such a prosperous, bountiful country like the United States, and it's just so inconceivable to me. I cannot reconcile a hungry child in my community. And I just think that this mission, wherever you are in the world, feeding people is such a worthy mission. And it's something that I think we should work to completely eradicate. God bless our farmers and everybody who works for food sustenance. But we try to come into this podcast and share a really great story about a nonprofit, and we have 3 today that were so groundbreaking with Feeding Tampa Bay as it relates to how you adapted during COVID. And while many nonprofits were sort of laying low and burying their head in the sand, just trying to wait out this pandemic, you did the complete opposite. And you leveraged this opportunity as a chance to ramp up. And perhaps that's because your population needed you to ramp up as, sort of different things were closing in and out. And so I had heard, I think it was back in April, Beth was sharing that you had acquired 12,000 new donors since the pandemic. And as we're talking before we jumped on, Kelley is like, well, actually, it's 15,000 since that conversation came up.
Each week that we delay recording this, it's like ticking up and up and up.
We should have done a Christmas recording, and then it could have been well over 20,000. But I want you to talk about what was your strategy, what was the thinking, and how did you get to that point?
Yes. So one of the things I would add that Thomas, in his conversation a moment ago about food banking in general, that he might not mention is that under his leadership, we were already looking at food banking maybe differently than many food banks. And that is moving away from a traditional model where most of our food just was distributed out through partnering agencies, but taking a much more direct approach to food delivery, kind of turning things upside down. And so it really put us in a great position to be ready for this horrible pandemic, because we began evolving our strategies more than a year ago to say, how could we very quickly get food to people when and where they needed it, much more breaking down those barriers to food delivery. And so with Thomas's leadership, we were, well into our way of that. And so when COVID came along and we needed to get mass amounts of food to what has turned out to be 400% more people who need food. And by the way, of those people who are now in our care, 68% of them have never navigated food relief before. So understanding system is not something that they are even remotely familiar with. So it behooves us even more to be able to go where they are, where is convenient, where they were already congregating. And we stepped into that immediately. And I think that's made the difference in us being able to meet the need. And it was because we were already kind of preparing to go in that direction prior to COVID.
Bravo.
I love that. So I keep thinking from Thomas's bio kind of piece was your business sensibilities leading into stepping into nonprofit and looking at it differently? What's challenged you to say, I'm not going to do the status quo. We're going to, be pioneers in some of these directions. What's that North Star for you?
Well, I think, again, your podcast could end up being like 3 hours long if I get off on a tangent.
Sorry.
So, but I would say, and I think our leadership team, Kelley, would agree with this. If you think about food banking as a model, it was built 50 years ago, and largely it's not evolved. And one of the things I do know from the business world, if your business model does not adapt and evolve, you'll get left behind. And so we think about that a lot. We may not use that exact terminology, but one of the conversations we continue to have is from the perspective of our customer, meaning those we serve. How do we continue to improve what we're doing to make sure that their lives are getting the support that they need? And so I would certainly say that it is an internal ethos, going back to Kelley's Rebel days. I think, did you guys pick up on the fact that she grew up in California, ended up in a small Christian college? Yes. I think we need to ask what caused the...
I was looking at the parallels with the
I'd
sunshine.
like a bit more information about that. I think your listeners are going to ask that question.
Kelley, we'll take that offline.
That's the tell-all book after this.
But I think we certainly have built an organizational ethos that ultimately says what has worked before is not going to work today. And I think Kelley has done that in her department. I think, but so too have the different leadership, the leadership team in our organization. We've deployed some really unique, different types of methodologies. We have 2 mobile grocery stores deployed into the community today because you want to overcome the obstacle of bricks and mortar in certain communities. So we think about these things a lot. And I would say, I do feel pretty good organizationally that we're probably driven by the idea that we need to turn the table over.
It's fantastic. And I love your use of ethos. That is such a big word for our company because it really does come back to the values and what you believe. And that really does drive the mission home because the missions are all relevant. We all care about how we're trying to serve people, but it's like at the end of the day, we don't want to be stuck in 50-year-old structures, that were built. I mean, the world has evolved so much. So I really love this rebellious way that you have looked at your business and the fact that you were planning ahead pre-pandemic. I mean, that should be a message to everyone listening that we've got to get ahead of these crises and have sort of a second plan in place so we can be able to adapt for anything that's coming at us. So talk a little bit about acquiring these 15,000 new donors. Right. How did you do it, and what are you going to do with them now?
Yes, thank you.
What are you going to do?
Hey, Kelley, what are we going to do with these folks?
Yes. One of the things I would say, building on the plan ahead, is the notion of speaking out early. And if we give any advice to anyone listening today, I would say that second step is incredibly important. I know there were a variety of nonprofits around the country who, particularly in the food space, that were thinking, let us sit back here for a moment and determine what piece of the puzzle we really play in this. And I think even that hesitation could be fatal in the minds of those that could support our efforts. And by some, stroke of luck, so to speak, we knew early on to reach out first to our public officials to say, and this was, March 10th, March 12th, we were reaching out to say, this is going to be a huge issue for you in the community. How can we be helpful? What can we do to come alongside of you? We're already ramping up all of our programs to meet the needs, but can we play a part in making things easier for you? And as a result of it, our public officials really got behind our food distributions. You would be surprised, our mayor and our county commissioners and senators have come along and actually distributed food at our mega pantries that are serving 3,500 families each distribution. And so that played a precursor then to them really stewarding our request for finances that came shortly thereafter. And so they were on our team, so to speak, from day one. And then wherever, our mayor is an example, wherever she has gone, she's been telling our story. So we have these advocates who are speaking on our behalf, and all of that, as well as the media coverage, caused this groundswell, very quick groundswell from people who said, let us support you financially and let us support you with our volunteer hours. And that initial swell, I think, is continuing on, and that has that's made the difference.
Well, let me add this, because, again, Kelley was nice to say something about me. Kelley had a development package in the water about 12 minutes after the crisis started. You joke, awesome. But Kelley. What we do well is we learned from hurricanes. And one of the things that Kelley did after the last hurricane was she built out an emergency response mechanism. So going back to your question, Becky, in some ways, first, I would say organizationally, we're very clear what our value proposition is, what our capabilities are, and how we can impact a community. Secondarily, I think what Kelley brought to us and really materially changed in our world was she knew how to help bring along resources, right? So we can do all the work in the world, but without the proper resources, partnerships, and capabilities, we're unable to do that. And Kelley, literally, within days, we had both online and then other sources articulated and developed into the community to let people know what we're going to do, why we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, where we're going to do it. And because of that, people had a very clear destination to go to.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much that's smart about this, right, John? Yeah. I mean, just even the thing that touches my heart so much, and it's the foundation of just goodness and humanity, is the spirit in which this happened. Your reaction was to go to your public officials and say, we got to partner because this tidal wave is coming at us, and we have got to be able to get in lockstep to be able to meet the demands of that. And the partnership is so pure. And it wasn't even seeking, media attention. It wasn't seeking donations. It was just getting in front of this problem to feed people. And because you were able to sync your messages, sync your strategies, I mean, the goodness came with it. People wanted to be a part of it. You had one voice with what you were doing. Everything about this is just so smart. I'm geeking out.
Yeah, and I think of even the story brand framework. Who we were talking to Chris Fox on the podcast a few weeks ago. It's like Feeding Tampa Bay was positioned as the guide in this time. Like, people are looking for answers, and you stepped in at a moment. It's like, we've got a plan. We've got a way that your money can do something really impactful. And you were just ready for that. And while everyone else is trying to make copies or whatever they're doing for their brochures, you've already deployed that. So I think that's really a powerful
Yes, and the irony
message
of that is it's security. People feel secure when they have that. And everything about food scarcity and what you do to come in is about providing security to people. So you are really in the business of making people feel safe, making them feel like they know where they're going, what the next steps are. So the next question that I have this again is so mind-blowing to me is what you did to engage your top donors, your board members, community advocates. And so please talk a little bit about how you got this task force together and how you orchestrated their involvement in your mission.
Right. So I would say the next stage after, speaking into early communication and early messaging is continual um, communication. So it's one thing to say, we jumped out in front, but the other thing is we know that our community supporters and donors were looking for information. Obviously, they're watching the news and they understand a crisis is growing. What can they do to be a part of it, and what is happening in our local community to support these folks who are out of work or in need of food, was something that they were very, very interested in. So we started very quickly. At the time, we did it weekly, and then we've now gone to monthly. But a community supporter, donor, somewhat of a VIP call, where we've invited folks, anyone and everyone that would like to, but predominantly the invitation has gone to our public officials, our donors, our board, and those who are in the work with us, to say, we're going to take a topical or a topic each week to talk about what's happening in this world. And we've spoken to the county. We've brought in special guests as well. So the county administrators come in to talk about unemployment and what that means. Our officials who are in the legislature talking about SNAP benefits and the part that plays in feeding folks. And so each topic has brought interest of a new group of people, and it's grown over time, and it's continued to keep us in that space of being the leader in the conversation. I think that's really important. And what we've seen, I think, is probably one of our most exciting statistics, is that 17% of those 15,000 new donors that I mentioned, 17% have given a second or third time throughout our COVID response. And we know that's directly related to the fact that we've kept them in the conversation.
So smart.
So smart. Is this something that y'all had thought about doing before this, or did this just kind of create this moment when you've got all this information, coming at you? You're looking for a trusted source. You're looking for a leader. What was the genesis for this?
I know, it's almost like they're all at their
like crystal ball of the COVID crisis. Because I remember
crisis communications managers, like
Yeah.
so able to adapt. I just feel like there's so many relatable tips that somebody could take away from being somebody that's just steady and prepared during these crises.
I know Thomas will have some additional thought on this, but I would say, food banks have had this disaster response mentality, because, and particularly in Florida because of hurricanes. We're used to activating relatively quickly, but the best pilot, honestly, for us in preparation for this was really the government shutdown that happened here. Gosh, it feels like it's forever ago, but not all that long ago. And like now, then we stepped very early in to say, what can we do to support the community? We had a food pantry up and active in our local airport because of the federal employees who lost their job within 48 hours of them being unemployed. And that was at the request of the CEO of the airport. But that first activation and the communication around it, where we, notified through the media, through all of our channels, we need your help to feed our folks in our community who've never needed food before. That really is the message that we learned during that time. And Thomas referred to, we created what we call our rapid response campaign as a result of that. And then we kept that active so that we went into rapid response again early in March as a result of kind of having tested that out during the government shutdown.
One of the other pieces that I think is really unique to your story is Trinity Cafe. And I'd love for you to kind of give some context around this and tell us the story of how that happened. I won't spill the beans on what happened.
Well, and I think it weaves back into the narrative that Kelley was just talking about pretty nicely, and COVID response. So I would say, one of the questions you asked earlier in your podcast is what kind of business, skills do you try and bring into the world in which you exist in today? And I think one of the things that I'm very aware of that we talk about a lot is that there is a saturation of nonprofits that sometimes is not as helpful to the community as it can be. It's confusing to the donor. It's often confusing to the folks we're trying to serve, and it creates a higher cost for delivery for a community when you have multiple infrastructures set up, right? So it's not the most efficient or thoughtful way to do that. So, for me, that's something that's always been on my mind. And so over the years, we've talked to different organizations for a variety of reasons, and we partner with over 500 of them every day. There are partners through whom we help, or they help us move food. But in particular, Trinity Cafe is a local organization that had a couple of sites that did direct feeding. So we as an organization largely confined our activities to what you would call groceries, right? Bags or boxes of food. Trinity Cafe's core mission was twofold. One was to make sure that they were providing a sit-down, well-prepared, healthy meal, right? So these are folks that came in and literally sat down at the cafe. Secondarily, which was just as critical, was that they were looking to take care of the individuals that came into their meal opportunity into the cafe with dignity and respect. They spent an inordinate amount of time trying to connect with the person who sat at the table and not only connect with them as a human being, but also provide other opportunities for support and service. And so these were two services that we weren't really engaged in, particularly the meal provision. So we viewed it as a complementary service to ours. And we have been doing some work in the community and surveying those we support. And over again, people had mentioned the need for meals, that not everybody takes a bag or a box of groceries home. And so we're aware that the changing nature of meal acquisition and consumption was shifting, even for those we serve. If you don't know, prior to COVID, about half of our meals are consumed outside, or consumed either by being eaten outside the house, or you buy it outside the house and take it home and eat it. Well, the folks we serve aren't any different, but we gave them no option for that. And so we had this theory that we could ultimately say, well, let us see if we can bring alongside that complementary service. Trinity was an organization smaller than ours in stature. They're about 1/10 the size that we are budget-wise. But they had really good bones. They were a fantastic organization. And I would say, importantly for us, they had the same values that we had, right? And so we began talking over a long period of time about whether it made sense for us to merge. There's a much longer narrative to that conversation, but ultimately our boards and we decided this is a perfect marriage for us because we can take in those services and offer those to our constituent base. So now there's something new that we can offer, but we can also then take this great idea that Trinity has and figure out how to extend it into broader parts of our community, right? They only have the ability to grow at a particular rate. We could accelerate that rate and create greater capability. So that's kind of the shortish version of why we merged. But I would ultimately say it is the smarter response to the community and the better response to the community. Let me fast forward to the last part. When we merged with Trinity, we had the idea that we could create meals to go, right? Again, not everybody wants to sit down. Some people want to take a meal and go. And so when we took Trinity over, or when we merged, they were doing about 500 meals a day. We ramped that up by about 250 more meals a day. And so we were doing about 700 meals a day, and some of them were going external, some were staying internal. COVID hit. And we had everybody and their brother reaching out to us to say, we need meals now. We took that basic concept, and at our peak, we ramped that up to 10,000 meals a day.
Wow.
And so we pivoted that quickly, but also because we were aware a while ago that meals were critical to our community, we happened to have made the right decision for the right reasons to bring that into our service portfolio for those we serve. Now, we did some unique things around that, but I think that's a good example of all the way back to what Kelley talked about and what you asked about. I think that's a good example of organizationally. This wasn't just my decision. Organizationally, we had a lot of thought and conversation about it, worked hard at it. organizationally, we really have and still have the belief that this can be done differently and better. And COVID really helped us validate that theory.
I would also add that from a development perspective, as we ramped up those meals, it was such an incredible opportunity for new partnerships. That innovation really spoke to partners who came along, for instance, Amazon and Uber Eats, that said, how can we help you deliver those meals door to door for people who were shut in? And that's not something, I might have had a dream of working with Amazon or Uber Eats, 6 months ago, but the opportunity to actually do it was because they were looking for a way to be helpful, and we had a solution in play where they could do what they do, which is deliver food or deliver items and take them door to door, which we would not have had the opportunity to do. And the second part of that is restaurant partners, and even our stadium, for instance, that were shut down at the time, said, how can we open up our kitchen so that you can have more space and use our staff, who we don't want to lay off, to help you prepare those meals, which is what was able to get us to ramp that up to the 10 and 15,000 meals a day. Those partnerships, by the way, live on long after we will not need to be delivering that many prepared meals. We're now looking for ways to continue the partnering with those kitchens, with those staffs, with those new partners. That opportunity was really an incredible one for us as the development team.
Stick a fork in me, which I actually think is the name of your podcast, isn't it? At Feeding Tampa Bay. I mean, the wholesomeness of this, and if you're sitting at home and you're just so tired of the divisiveness of the world right now, and just it seems so hard in COVID, I just cling to this story because I think it is so wholesome and good, and it shows that people want to rally around being good, serving others. We see that there's a massive gap that's created when a pandemic or a crisis occurs. You mentioned hurricanes. And it's like the only way that we can thrive in those moments is if we come together and fill in those gaps. And shout out to Amazon, shout out to Uber Eats, shout out to your stadiums and restaurants, who are also probably suffering financially because of the effects of the pandemic, and doing that in the spirit of just feeding people and making sure that our basic needs are met it just fills my heart like nothing else.
I wonder if y'all don't have a story that really stuck out to you. Maybe it's recent, or maybe it's just since you've been serving the mission, that you could kind of share that comes full circle of why you do this.
I'll jump in. We could tell you some amazing stories about large donations from folks like Tom Brady, who jumped in very quickly, and Eddie DeBartolo, and others whose names might not be as familiar to you in your area, but they're large donors. But for me, the one that continues to, fill my tank is of those prepared meals that we delivered. We've served a woman just south of us in her home for multiple weeks in a row. And she reached out to me, got my cell number somehow, and wanted to brag on the quality of the meals and tell me about them and what the recipes were, and that she felt the need to make a donation to pass that along to others. And she continues to do that, and the technology, for whatever reason, is tough for her. So every week she calls us, and one member of my team or myself has an opportunity to help her with her, in some cases $10 or $20 transaction. And yet her gratitude and her kindness and her understanding, just really, for me, helps me remember, why we do what we do. And every donation, whether it's large or whether it's small, plays a really integral part in that. And we can't take any bit of it for granted, and we don't.
Oh, I love that story. I feel like I can see her like in her home, like little apron, just cooking. And it's just such a great full circle moment. Thomas, do you have one that you want to share? I don't ever want to shut down anybody's story.
I think there's a couple of things that I would like to say. I think, Becky, you've talked about this a couple times, but I think it's worth noting. We work with a professor at USF who has been studying food insecurity for years. And several years ago, he started to educate us on not only the physical impact of food inside a family, but the cultural and familial impact. And one of the things that we're very aware of is food is a binding element to who we are, to who we love and care for. It allows us to come in relationship with ourselves and those about us in some really important ways. And we think about that often, and it defines how we look at the work we do. And when you have that conversation with a donor, everybody understands what food means to them and their families. And so you've mentioned that several times. And I think I would say that's an important part of who we are, is we understand we're providing a meal. We also understand we're providing connective tissue to who you are and who you care about. And I think that's an important moment for us. The second thing that I would share is one of the unique things of the jobs that Kelley and I have, and we have served together out on the line many times where we've handed food out ourselves, is food banks and nonprofits stand in a really unique position. We stand in front of great need that would break your heart. As I looked at people driving through those food lines in tears, I mean, people just literally bawling all the way through because they are going to get a meal that a month ago they didn't know where their next meal was coming from, and we're there with them and for them. We also stand between a generosity that is staggering sometimes. Mm-hmm. And one of the unique parts of our world is we get to step into that moment and try and bring the two together. It feels like it's about us, but it's not. It's really about that moment where we bring these two folks who would otherwise not come in contact with each other. We give them the opportunity to connect. I know for me, that really is the thing that I have noticed most during all of this. We receive a ton of credit, and there are certainly parts of this that I would like to say, boy, I feel proud about. But I think more than anything other that we have tried to do, we have tried to make sure that our community is healthy and whole, and that those that can help and will help do, and those that need help and have to have us there can make sure that we're there. And I think for all of us that do this, that's the part that makes this psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually fulfilling.
We got to get Thomas on the TEDx stage to tell this story.
Oh, he would be great.
I feel like we just got a leadership dump of this is true leadership, on so many levels.
And it's just so visionary and good at its core. Mm-hmm. And I just have this sense of I feel like I'm elevating out of my chair a little bit because it's just so wholesome and good. And I think one of the things that we didn't even drill down into is that when you created this task force with these board members, donors, I mean, you have all of these passionate people that are coming together in the name of making sure that people don't go hungry in your community. I mean, you have these 15,000 donors, but you got incredible major gifts from this group, correct? And from others that opened doors, because I hope I'm allowed to say this, but I even heard a story about one of your task force members paying for Wi-Fi, in certain spaces. And it's so wonderful to me that you would come to the table, and when they say, what do you need? It's you are prepared with your tick list of here are all the gaps we have and how can you fill in? So can you talk a little bit just about that process and what you're doing with these individuals that are so highly engaged right now at that level?
Yeah, I was thinking a bit about 8 months or so ago, as an extension of a brand elevation we were working on. We decided to develop a campaign about creating a movement around ending hunger. And this also was part of the strategy towards this Ending Hunger by 2025 campaign that we have. And so the concept of people using their funds and their voice as well was something that we kind of had the various different pieces and parts of that in play. And so it was not difficult then for us to reach out early on to say, now what can we do with this movement? People who have joined us, and they actually go on our website and they sign up and indicate that they're a part of this with us. And then So to activate them, because that's exactly what they're looking for now, is I'm part of something, and what are we going to do together that's radical and different, and how are we going to be transformative? Because these are folks, by doing this, by their nature, they want to create change. And so then it was easy for us, with those early donors and with those folks who are in the movement with us, to say, let's convene around a topic, and let's make sure that you have more tools to work with in using your voice around this ending hunger strategy. And so, COVID just ramped all of that up and allowed us to, even have further activation during this time. And I think, again, I continue to believe that these are folks who are not just situational with us, but rather going to be in it with us in this movement for a period of time. Whatever the next thing, that increases awareness is important, but not necessary, because I think these folks understand together we are going to end hunger in the Tampa Bay region, and it's a solid partnership.
I think what Kelley, again, as I listen to this, we work together every day, but I think one of the things that you're asking, Becky and John, which really comes back to one of the core, again, tenets of success, is that we have been able to attract extraordinary folks to our mission.
Clearly.
As Kelley describes her work, I find myself thinking, wow, the concept and the theories that she has deployed for us through a wide variety. And we just got off the phone before we got on this podcast with you about further movement towards our communication strategies and how do we connect people. I would also say that we would be remiss if we did not mention that we have another 100 plus Thomases and Kelleys out there. Folks that are doing just extraordinary things, that are working beyond their skill set or capability that I just don't know that we could do justice to talk about how terrific we have performed as a group. We have definitely outkicked our coverage in a number of different ways, but I think all of this goes back to having a group of people who share the values that we have organizationally. A couple of years ago, we did a survey. We do a survey every year of our team, and one of the folks that did the survey for us, kind of employee health engagement connection, one of the things she said to us was, the thing that you all, every single one of you to a person, cares about deeply is making sure that people are fed. And it's that binding element that allows our team to do what it does. And it's just, Kelley is but one fantastic example of people that just do their jobs in extraordinary ways.
Okay, you guys, I think we could talk to you for the next.
I know. I have so many questions.
So many questions.
Yes, I feel like the Chronicle of Philanthropy needs to do a case study on this as an example. It's just so fantastic, and what you've done is so great. And as an Italian who, had a very pushy grandmother who was wonderful about pushing food on me, and it resonates so strongly with me about how food really does bind us together. I thought that was really a fantastic example. Do you want to ask the one last question?
We have to. We want to soak this up. We always ask everybody, what's your one good thing? Could you impart some wisdom? Could be a hack or a mindset shift for everybody to implement today?
Thomas, I'm going to follow you.
Mine is everybody matters.
Thomas, do you know what the number one core tenet of We Are for Good is? Did you plan this?
I did not.
Go to our website.
Go to our website. Number one is Everyone Matters. That is literally it.
Kindred spirits.
Oh my gosh, goosebumps.
I
Okay.
need to play a sound effect for that. I kind of do.
Yeah, go for it.
Oops. I've never used that before.
Wow, that one's
Crickets.
really...
There we go. Okay.
Well chosen.
Okay, Kelley, please have something just as heartfelt, and we'll try not to botch it with our sounds.
To ruin the moment.
I think mine would be stand together. We have a hashtag that says stand with FTB that we've used through this movement, but it really means that we stand for our community. We stand for those we serve. We stand with our government officials. We stand with our donors, and because of our donors. And so as a result of that, I would say stand together is my main message for today.
Oh,
I
that's
love
going to
it,
be
guys.
like the hashtag for this podcast. And it's kind of back to ethos. That is the ethos of surviving and thriving, I think, in COVID. And nonprofit is the ones that are banding together, the ones that are rising up. I mean, they're the ones that are succeeding. So I think that's such a great takeaway for today. Thomas, Kelley, you have filled our hearts, you have filled our community, and we are just so grateful that you would come. We just wish you all the best and keep doing the great work that you're doing.
So how's the best way for folks to connect with you all and Feeding Tampa Bay?
Definitely visit our website, feedingtampabay.org. There's a variety of information about right off the bat about how to get involved and learn more about our work. We would appreciate your voice, your funds, your support in any way. And we thank you for the opportunity to tell our story.
And you all are in a couple social media feeds because I do want to point people to there because the Feeding Tampa Bay Instagram is fantastic. It's very well done. John would love it because there's a lot of icons on there. and the imagery, I think, is very joyful. And I think the marketing is just so smart. So they can check you out at Feeding Tampa Bay. Are you on Facebook or any other platforms?
All of
Of course.
Facebook, Twitter,
LinkedIn as well. Folks can reach out to both of us via LinkedIn.
right?
Wonderful. Okay.
Thank you. This has been a complete joy to get to talk to you all.
Thank you for the
We're
great work
honored.
you do.
We're honored.
time.
Thank you.